Chapter 1 Ancestors and Demons, 1890–1907. The beginning. Before ever rising to the position of the village chief, Wanji Karua had been just an ordinary man in the village minding his business. He was neither wealthy nor poor. The Kikuyu measured wealth in quantities of land and livestock. However, the greatest wealth a man could possess was strong, able-bodied sons who would eventually perpetuate further the family name. The continuity of the family name was a sacred undertaking, and non-negotiable, under the unwritten but strict Kikuyu traditional moral code. To sire at least one son was a paramount obligation for every man. Wanji Karua's first wife, Wanjegu, had been barren. No problem, he quickly and happily took a second wife called Wakara, who bore him 5 daughters before a strange illness took her life. It was still not a problem. A man could marry as many wives as he wished, provided there was enough livestock to pay for dowry and a sizable portion of the clan's land to farm and fend for the family. However, Wanji Karua did not have enough livestock nor land to claim a third wife who could bear him the sons he wanted, so, for many years, he worked very hard to multiply his livestock and acquire more land rights from his clansmen. By the time he could afford a third wife, he was almost past his prime. Meanwhile, his 5 daughters from his second wife Wakara had grown up, and happily, he had married them off one by one, with his main focus being on the bride price they would fetch. But there was a problem. The stories surrounding his 5 daughters became the subject of speculation and bewilderment in the village for many years. His eldest daughter choked to death on a piece of meat during her dowry ceremony. His second daughter married but remained barren. The third got married and bore several children, but each one perished in infancy. The fourth fell out with her husband and returned home, forcing Wanji to refund the dowry, which was the most shameful thing a man could be forced to do under Kikuyu customary law. The 5th daughter was morbidly overweight and she had hair growing under her chin. No man ever became interested because of her odd appearance. There was a rumor that Wanji's second wife Wakara was the daughter of a lucrative witch doctor. That when the witch doctor died, the dark forces he had once commanded turned against his daughter and her children, leaving them cursed by the very craft that had once brought fortune. All this had made Wanji's reputation around the village to suffer greatly, to an extent that whenever important decisions in the village needed the vote of respected men, he was often ignored. In order to find favor with his peers again, Wanji desperately needed a third wife to bear him at least one son, if not more. In Kikuyu customs, there was a silent saying which stated, "A man is not a man until he has sired and raised a son to carry forth his name and the blood of his ancestors." In some Kikuyu communities, the tradition was even stricter. A man was not permitted to sit and drink among Kikuyu elders and other accomplished men until his firstborn son had married and fathered a son of his own. Only then was he considered worthy of their company and respect. Wanji Karua's third wife did not come quite easily though. He was now a much older man and everybody had heard the stories about his daughters. No young woman in the village was dreaming to be his wife, and no sensible father was eager to marry off his daughter to a man of his repute. So, Wanji Karua, having been denied the luxury to pick a bride of his choice, was willing to take whatever he could get, but he did get a wife. Her name was Nyaguthiai. She was from a neighboring village and had been married before. On the night she came to his house to be his wife, she already had 5 teenage children in tow, who stole the spark of the wedding night. Nyaguthiai's first husband, Githina, had died without any wealth for her to fend for herself and her children, 2 sons and 3 daughters, and so, the elders of her clan were not going to turn away any man who would take the burden off their hands in exchange for some livestock. The heir, frustrated by his sudden role as a stepfather to 5 pot-bellied children, with lavish appetites, Wanji's only wish was for his new wife to bear him a son, who would be a welcome relief and a remedy to his many predicaments. His wish came true one day, when Nyaguthiai gave birth to a son not long after. He named the boy Karua in accordance to Kikuyu customs that dictated the firstborn son must have his paternal grandfather's name. Finally, Wanjui had a son. He was very happy, and slowly he started to earn the respect of his peers once again. The boy, now his father's pride and joy, grew up normally, and Wanjui spared not a minute to groom him as the family heir. Meanwhile, his third wife, Nyaguthia, died of some mysterious fever when Karua was around the age boys go out to herd their father's livestock. She left her other 5 children in Wanjui's care. In the course of time, Wanjui's 2 stepsons became young men and his 3 stepdaughters matured into young women ready for marriage. Since they were not his by blood, Wanjui quietly sent away his stepsons back to their father's clan, so that they would not inherit any wealth from him. Everything he had now belonged to his one and true son, Karua. However, in an effort to be fair to his stepsons, he made plans so that the dowry he was going to receive from giving away his stepdaughters in marriage would be transferred to the stepsons so that they didn't walk away empty-handed and probably have enough to buy some land within their own clan. Wanjui's actions may have seemed justifiable, but he had acted contrary to Kikuyu customary laws regarding stepchildren. According to the customs, when he married his third wife Nyaguthia, who already had children, he was supposed to treat those children as his own without any prejudice. It was a matter that briefly grabbed the attention of the village and was discussed by the Council of Elders. The Kikuyu Council of Elders primarily oversaw matters of justice on behalf of the community. It was made up of elderly men, each man representing a specific family clan within the village. Since the village settlement consisted of 13 neighboring family clans, the council thus had 13 members, 1 from each clan. One of the elders headed the council and was known as the headman, but he had no political power to be considered as the central leader. At least not until the British arrived. However, since Wanjui's case was a private matter to do with his household and not a community concern, he exercised his right to do as he pleased, and the Council of Elders did not summon him for judgment. Wanjui managed to marry off 2 of his stepdaughters, leaving the youngest behind, who was known as Origia. It was not certain whether she too would get married when the time came, as she had some physical challenges. One leg was noticeably shorter than the other, and her hands were small and crooked. Her disability was expected to keep suitors away, as she would be unable to perform the strenuous tasks expected of Kikuyu women. Though Wanjui often wondered what to do with her, he was too preoccupied with raising his son to worry about her. As the years went by, Karua bloomed into a strong, dashing boy who excelled quite well in all activities boys his age were expected to perform. He was tall and a fast runner. He looked after his father's livestock well, attended to farming, and was a skilled hunter. His father could finally hold his head high around the village with pride. As Karua's initiation gradually approached, his father was beside himself with joy that his son, his flesh and blood, was about to become a man and finally marry. My name and the blood of my ancestors will continue to the next generation after all, Wanjui thought. He was finally at peace. The Kikuyu believed that siring a male heir in one's old age was a sign of approval from the ancestors. Meanwhile, a man could live the rest of his days on earth with the ultimate satisfaction, since the Kikuyu god, Mwinyaga, was also believed to look more kindly upon a late-born heir than one conceived earlier in life. Then one day, Wanjui's favor with the Creator somehow ran out. Karua went out to the fields on a regular herding assignment and stumbled upon a snake. The other boys he was with killed the snake, but the damage had already been done. They rushed him to the village medicine man to have the bite treated. As the young Karua lay shaking on a mat, someone was relaying the news to his father, who had been drinking Muritina, the popular Kikuyu beer, in a hut with his peers. By the time his father arrived at the medicine man's hut, Karua had already undergone every necessary procedure to save his life, from draining the blood where the bite occurred to administering various bitter herbs by mouth to weaken the poison. Had the medicine man known anything about snakes, he would not have troubled himself treating the boy, since the snake that had bitten him was not poisonous at all. Indeed, several villagers after seeing the dead snake later testified how the same type of snake had bitten some of them and others they knew, and all lived without taking herbs. The revelations by the villagers came as a relief to Wanjui. However, the boy still lost consciousness. The medicine man now attempted to administer different herbs to counter the ones that had knocked out the boy cold. Despite the efforts, Karua died the next morning. The cause of his death was obvious, but no one dared speak of it, for the elderly medicine man was much revered in the village. It was not the snake bite that had killed Wanjui's son, rather it was an overdose of herbs. Wanjui's world fell apart once again. Even as sympathies poured in from the villagers, Wanjui could not help but lament as he thought about all the misfortunes that had befallen his children. He did not know whether to blame the medicine man or the snake. Whatever the case, the strange story of his son's death was going to live in people's minds for a long time, but the family name and the blood of his ancestors had come to an end. It soon became a widely held belief in the village that Wanjui had lost his only son as a consequence of rejecting his stepsons when he should have embraced them. Thus, even as he mourned, he walked the village burdened by shame and regret, haunted by the memory of the stepsons he had cast away. The bier and the shadow of death. Wanjui, now at the age where men supposedly reflect back proudly their achievements in life and slowly usher in their golden years, knew there was nothing left for him to live for. His only remaining companions were his first wife, Wanjegu, who was now just as old, his two daughters from his second wife, Wanjera and Nyakyanda, whom no suitor still wanted to claim, and lastly Warija, his crippled stepdaughter from his third wife, who could hardly lift a gourd from the floor to make porridge. With no sons to tend to the household's livelihood, his livestock dwindled, the granary emptied, and the crops in the fields withered, leaving him with little to sustain the household. He knew then that his life was as good as over. There was no point in trying anymore. There would be no fourth wife and no hope for another son. Thereby there would also be no respect from his kinfolks and the villagers alike. If he could not earn the admiration of ordinary men, how could he possibly earn it from his ancestors, or even the Kikuyu god for that matter? He spent the next few years drinking heavily. Muretina, the Kikuyu beer, seemed to be his only consolation in life. When he got drunk, he would make rounds in the village cursing loudly while lamenting the death of his son Karua, and then he would go home to insult the women in his household, reminding them sometimes with kicks and blows that they meant absolutely nothing to him. His two unmarried daughters, Wanjira and Nyakyanda, suffered his wrath the most, for in them he saw two separate losses, one for the dowry that never came his way and the other for the one he had to refund. His first wife Wanjegu, who had been barren, and his crippled stepdaughter Warija were not spared either, though for them he was more lenient, for in Kikuyu customs, it was bad luck to look down upon one's disability. Whatever the case, the four women were a painful reminder of his weaknesses and failures as far as the future of the lineage was concerned. He was now a man with a death wish, hoping to sleep one night and embrace the luxury of dying peacefully in his sleep instead of waking up to face another day of humiliation. No such luxury came his way. He would often speak to himself, "The Kikuyu god has refused to give me sons, and now he is punishing me further by denying me death also, just to watch me suffer in the eyes of the village. How he must hate me." The stepdaughter. Wanjui's stepdaughter, Warija, was now around the age girls were expected to get married. Physically crippled and abandoned, Warija was not considered a suitable candidate for marriage. She was pushed aside as girls her age took the podium to become wives and future mothers. Now an outcast, Warija spent the bulk of her days confined within the hedgerows of her stepfather's homestead, engaged in light household chores, running small errands and keeping her aging stepmother company. Despite her shortcomings, she was nonetheless very bright. She had come to learn and master everything girls were taught, and she knew the customs of her people well enough to understand her situation. The Kikuyu circumcised their women. Warigia had dreaded the whole thing. It was one thing for boys to undergo circumcision, but entirely another for girls. On the day of her circumcision, she and 20 other girls had spent the night in an old woman's hut. At dawn, the whole lot walked to bathe nude in a faraway stream. The morning cold was meant to numb the body and dull the senses so that the circumcision ritual would be bearable. However, it was not always the case, as young girls would scream and cry in the old woman's hut, while others would pass out from the horror of it all. In spite of this, Kikuyu girls were very proud to undergo the ritual, for it allegedly turned them to women. Warigia dreaded the process but was a bit eager to see whether undergoing the initiation would upgrade her status and get her a husband in future. However, when it was her turn to get into the old woman's hut and receive the ritual, the old woman refused to operate on her. "You don't really need it," the old woman said. "You can never be a mother the way you are." The other girls, even under the bloodletting circumstances, sneered at her, probably from the prospect of them becoming wives and mothers and Warigia remaining just a cripple. This hurt her more than the physical ritual would have. As an outcast, she was expected to succumb to whatever fate brought her way. In most cases for girls in her situation, she would be married off to some old man who did not need more children. She would then become some sort of household slave, always looked down upon, in the name of giving purpose to her life. She dreaded the day when that was going to happen. She had hoped a special man willing to overlook her condition would come along and marry her, but time was proving her wrong. No suitors wanted anything to do with a crippled girl, especially if that crippled girl was the stepdaughter of Wanjui Karua. Hope had dried from her like blood dries up in a corpse, and so she resigned herself to the uncertain future that awaited her. After her stepbrother Karua died, she knew her aging stepfather was left without an heir. If things stayed the way they were, she knew from her knowledge of Kikuyu customs that upon the death of her stepfather, she and her unmarried stepsisters were entitled to inherit a small portion of his possessions, while the bulk of the assets would go back to the male clansmen to divide among themselves. On the other hand, an unmarried daughter, if she could bear a son out of wedlock, the son could be considered a legitimate heir to his grandfather if he had no sons. The problem was an unmarried daughter having a child out of wedlock was considered a taboo. Her reputation would suffer for life, and the child she begets will never gain favor with society for being a bastard. As a cripple, Warigia was uncertain if her reputation mattered or not. From the moment she was born with uneven limbs, she had been a source of astonishment. People were surprised when she survived infancy, surprised when she began to walk, and surprised again when she played like other children. If having a child out of wedlock would be yet another surprise, then so be it. That was the story of her life. As for her reputation, it didn't trouble her. She had never possessed one to begin with. She decided she was going to bear a child, God help her, a son, and groom him to be the heir her stepfather wanted, and in doing so, she will have consolidated her place in the dysfunctional family of Wanjui Karua, and probably save it from its end. But there was only one problem: who would father her child? One day Wanjui came home drunk again to find the household deserted. It was the eve of the song and dance ceremony, and all the women in the village were required to take part in the preparation of the forthcoming feast. Warigia could however not go, since she had short crooked hands to be of any significant help. Yet in her condition, she was not totally useless. She could fetch firewood, cook food, sweep the floor, and perform other light chores. Inside the heart of a madman. She was home alone trying to weave a basket when her stepfather came stumblingly drunk. Usually, her stepmother Wanjegu brought food to his hut. On this particular day, she found herself compelled to the task. As she slowly limped towards her stepfather's hut trying to hold steadily a tray of boiled sweet potatoes and beans, she could hear the old man talking to himself again, cursing his ancestors and daring the Creator to end his life, the routine that Warijia was now familiar. She was shaking as she entered the hut, hoping to lay the tray beside him and scatter away before he noticed. He lay in his mat inebriated, with his hands on his face still talking to his imaginary ancestors. She managed to put the tray down, but she was too slow. As soon as he felt her presence, he abruptly ended dialogue with his ancestors and demons to focus on her. By the time she was turning around to leave, his hands, old and stretchy and strong, grabbed her. In her condition, it was impossible to escape his tight grip, and when she saw how confused his eyes looked, she feared for her life. He rose and pinned her down, his hands on her neck. Her screams became just an echo in the deserted vicinity as everyone was out getting ready for the ceremony ahead. It was just him and her, the dark hut, and not forgetting all the Kikuyu ancestors and demons raging in his head. She did not fully comprehend what happened next, but when it was all over, she was still breathing. That means his intention had not been to kill her, but afterwards she did not feel the same again, and something constantly told her what her stepfather had done was horribly wrong. It was something that had never happened to her before, and as she tried to retrieve herself beneath her stepfather's drunken sleepy body, she knew he had taken away her innocence forever. He had defiled her. That evening, as she lay alone in the hut she shared with her two stepsisters, she knew her relationship with her stepfather, as strange as it had been before, was about to take a turn for the worse. She was now lost in deep thought. It is true the old man had been very drunk, but surely, in the morning he would come back to his senses and realize he had defiled his stepdaughter. Afraid she might tell on him, he was either going to send her away or maybe marry her off quickly now. Worse yet, he was going to keep her around and repeat the act. Warijia could not stop thinking. Warijia thought about escaping the homestead to rejoin one of her brothers back in her mother's previous clan, but it was a 3-day journey, and in her condition, she was probably going to die of exhaustion if wild animals did not kill her first. When her two stepsisters returned from the ceremony affairs, she did not say a word to them. She knew even if they believed her, they were in no position to help her, since just like her, they were hopeless prisoners of Kikuyu customs. The next morning, after a tormenting sleepless night, she woke up to face the uncertainty that hung in the air. The old man, for whatever reason, always woke up fussy and disgusted with whoever would be serving him breakfast that morning. Warijia had prayed throughout the night to the Kikuyu god not to return strength to the old man's body so that he could finally rest with his ancestors, and everybody would be happy, including the old man himself, for it had been his wish. The Kikuyu god had other plans instead, for not only did Wanju wake up full of health that morning, but his energies to lash out and curse to everything that lived in his homestead, including goats and cows, had been renewed 10 times over. She was not only trapped under the burden of being a woman in a world of prejudiced customs, but she had to deal with being a cripple whose fate was now entangled with that of a man who had clearly lost his mind, her stepfather Wanju Karua. She had tried her best to avoid him that morning, but he had such an intimidating, inescapable presence that seemed to haul over the entire homestead, making it impossible for her to hide from him. Struggling to sweep the floor, he walked up to her. If she had found it hard in the past to look at him in the eyes, she was going to find it impossible now even to breathe when he was glaring at her. He did not say anything to her, and after a while, he went away quietly. She did not stop sweeping and would not look at him even as he walked away. Either he had forgotten what he had done to her, or he did not think there was anything particularly distasteful about it. He did not threaten her or warn her against telling anyone. Whatever he was thinking, it was not for her to beat up herself with it. She reminded herself she was the victim here. What was done, and life for her, even as the crippled stepdaughter of a madman, still had to continue despite looking pointless. The days that followed became increasingly troubled for Warigia. Her dreams of ever decently getting married were now permanently shelved, and she knew that whatever direction the hand of fate was going to point her, was going to be doomed. She was certain now she would be married off to one of those old men, to become not really a wife but somebody's property, not any more valuable than a cow or a goat, sheltered in slave-like conditions for the rest of her days, such that even if the old man died, another one would take his place. It was an old Kikuyu custom that was meant to dispose away undesirable women with a sense of dignity. Once again, her stepmother and stepsisters happened to be away from the homestead on communal duty, and again, Warigia could not go. When her stepfather came home drunk again, she was disturbed at the prospects of having to take food inside his gloomy hut, which he shared with his Kikuyu ancestors and demons, and she didn't know what they would tell him to do with her this time. Maybe kill her. Nonetheless, Warigia had brought herself to face the difficult duty with understanding that in order for her to find some sanity in her life, she must go on living in her stepfather's homestead, since whatever awaited her anywhere else could be much worse. Better the devil you know, she thought. Therefore, she might as well have continued with her chores for the good of the homestead, the only home she knew. It was not all bad. She had her own bed, food was always plenty, and she was never overworked. Her stepfather also did not scare her as much now. He was just a man still mourning the death of his only son through alcohol. He lay in his mat talking to himself as she placed the meal beside him. This time he did not notice her at all, yet she was not afraid of being noticed by him. She left the hut only to return minutes later to monitor him. She was astonished that she cared whether he ate or not. This was not like her. If she knew what was best for her, then she ought not to be around when he wakes up. However, she did not go anywhere and found herself kneeling beside him, shaking his body with her hands, asking him to wake up and eat. He opened his eyes and looked at her. For a long time, he would not remove his gaze from her. She never looked at him in the eyes ever, so it was beyond her why this time she was making an exception. She was relieved a bit to see that the Kikuyu ancestors and demons were not present in his mind tonight, but then wondered why she was herself, still present in his heart. "What do you want?" he suddenly exclaimed. She replied him by leaving the room, but on her way out, he called her back. She turned around and slowly moved towards him with her face down. "Where is your mother and sisters?" he asked. "They went to help prepare the feast for the wedding tomorrow," Warigia replied. "Wedding?" he shouted. "Your sisters have nobody to marry them, and yet they go assisting the ones that do, fools." Then he looked at her sharply. "And you, when will you get married?" She did not say anything to him and continued staring at the ground. He ate his food as she stood there, and then he asked her for water. She went and got him a calabash of water, and as she handed it to him, he grabbed her wrist. This time she did not scream. He pulled her to his mat and slid away further to make space for her. She did not resist but lay down, closed her eyes, and waited for what she now knew was inevitable. This time she was not confused, and she let him have his way with her. When it was all over a few minutes later, he fell asleep beside her. She got up and straightened her clothing, took the tray and the calabash and walked away, feeling different from the last time it had happened. She was not disgusted or angry with him, but she was shocked that she had somehow enjoyed the experience. Wanji Karua had been a man in the last leg of his life when he started a secret relationship with his stepdaughter Warigia. He had longed for death to come quickly, and his heavy drinking seemed the only sensible way to wait for it. Drinking gave him comfort so that in the dying process, he could forget that he was dying in the midst of domestic agony, the shame his daughters had brought him, 2 dead wives, and the premature death of his son Karua, who left not only a void in his heart, but also a vacuum in the family for the position of an heir. A dying man without a son was like a spoiled harvest, lacking the seeds to plant and bring up the next crops alike to the ones that came before. Wanji Karua, well aware of this, had tried hard in the last few years to salvage his image by taking a fourth wife, but the status quo did not favor him. Men his age were only allowed by the customs to marry again if they had reached a certain peak in life where accumulated wealth and the unquestionable respect from their peers was paramount. The origins of misery. Wanji Karua had neither the wealth nor the respect to argue his case to the Council of Elders, the men who made all the decisions. One of the elders in the council was his older brother, Kiramba. Kiramba Karua was the firstborn son of Karua Kiramba and his first wife Wanjeri. Wanji was the second-born son, only 1 year apart. There were 4 other sons and 4 daughters behind them, bringing the total number of children born to Karua Kiramba by his first wife to 10. Even though Karua Kiramba was a blacksmith who owned a small herd of cattle, he had no reservations about taking a second wife. It placed more hardships on his family when the second wife gave birth to 5 more mouths to feed, 3 daughters and 2 sons. By the time Wanji was old enough to earn his initiation ranks, his father succumbed to the highland fever, which was somewhat a common way to die for poor men struggling to feed large families. Kiramba, the eldest brother, was rather a shrewd heir who succeeded where his father had failed. He managed to consolidate the family assets, wittily lifting the disgraced family name to a position of affluence, but he only did it for himself, leaving everyone behind. Kiramba was a man of far-reaching vision, but only as far as his interests were concerned. It served him quite well to be the firstborn in a family whose father was gone and there were 7 unmarried sisters. In Kikuyu customs, the oldest son, in the deceased absence of his father, assumed full responsibility for the family. Therefore, when suitors came for his sisters with loads of dowry, he was happy to make the trade. As the new head of the family, he made sure that he married off all his 7 sisters and the dowry paid for them channeled back in the family to expand their livelihood. The bulk of the dowry was usually livestock, which Kiramba incorporated as part of the family property, but he was very cunning. He only did so after he had allocated each of his 7 brothers, including Wanjui, a meager share of their father's original estate. Kiramba was thus left with the lion's share after he received the dowry. Additionally, he made sure that all his brothers had contributed as much as possible in taking care of the burgeoning herds of livestock that started to stream in as each of the sisters got married one after the other. However, as his brothers reached manhood and prepared to take wives, Kiramba foresaw a challenge. Knowing they would expect handsome compensation to pay dowry with, in return for their efforts in expanding the family's wealth, he devised a solution. He made sure they married women who were, in one way or another, considered rejects of society. Kiramba used his wealth to bribe the Council of Elders into identifying families with daughters no one else wanted. The plan was to lower the bride price significantly. Following his strategy, one brother married a woman from a family of notorious thieves, another married a mute woman, 2 brothers took wives with sleeping sickness and epilepsy respectfully. The last 2 brothers married landless widows older than themselves, each with a couple of grown children. As for Wanjui, he was matched with Wanjegu, a woman previously married but divorced by her first husband for being barren. As the years passed, Wanjui and the other 6 brothers came to realize how badly Kiramba had shortchanged them in terms of inheritance and the wives they married. Seeking justice, they took up the matter with the Council of Elders. Little did they know that Kiramba had already bribed every member of the council so that the case was determined in his favor. From that moment on, Wanjui and Kiramba became bitter enemies. The 6 brothers lived miserable lives, weighed down by shame, poverty, and alcoholism, burdens that were directly linked to the sort of wives they had been forced to marry. One by one, they all met an early death. Wanjui was the only one among his brothers who managed to remarry. For a brief moment, it seemed fortune was finally favoring him until tragedy struck. His second wife bore only daughters before passing away, and his third wife, along with his only son, also met an untimely death. With his wealth dwindling and old age creeping in, Wanjui consoled himself with the hopeful outcome that Kiramba would die before him, so he could spit on his grave, which was an old Kikuyu wish for one's enemy. But fate seemed to mock him. Kiramba remained strong and healthy, his wealth affording him 3 wives who had given him 8 daughters and 6 sons. Wanjui could not fathom why the Kikuyu god had showered such abundance upon a man so corrupt, while he himself had suffered endlessly. Acts of abomination. After Wanjui now became convinced that the Kikuyu god had abandoned him beyond redemption, chose to continue his affair with his stepdaughter in secret. To him, the relationship was an act of defiance or a deliberate mockery of Mwinyaga, the god of the mountain. Under Kikuyu customary law, a man taking his stepdaughter to bed was crossing the point of no return, irretrievably bringing disgrace upon himself and causing embarrassment to the family for a lifetime. If Wanjui's transgression came to light, the Council of Elders would unleash their full wrath upon him, likely banishing him from society for good. Even though she knew it was wrong to carry on an affair with her stepfather, Warigia convinced herself it was justifiable if one was a cripple and had no suitors drifting outside her home. Besides, it was her only chance to have a child to call her own. She may not have envisioned this was how it would happen, but she couldn't see it any other way. Beggars cannot be choosers, she thought. To ensure the other women in the household would not suspect the horrendous acts going on inside his hut, Wanjui announced that Warigia must sweep his hut at least thrice a week and do it well. The hut did not really need much sweeping, but on every scheduled sweeping day, Wanjui would be there waiting, drunk and debating his Kikuyu ancestors and demons. Warigia would sweep the hut, and then sweep her way into his bed. After a few months, her stepmother Wanjegu was the first to notice Warigia was expectant and reported the matter to Wanjui, who was stunned. He had never really expected her to get pregnant. He ignorantly imagined that she was a cripple outside and inside. He pretended he was furious with her, so as to be seen as upholding his role as head of the family. He summoned Warigia in front of his wife and the other 2 daughters to question her about the child's father. "Tell us about the man who did this to you," Wanjui asked. She did not say anything, and he was relieved she was still committed to conceal their affair. Knowing he was secretly responsible for the situation, he quietly retreated in secret shame, leaving the women to beat around the bush as he carried on with his drinking. He did not expect Warigia to sweep his hut again. It was as though he had accomplished his goal, to sin against the Kikuyu god for refusing to answer his prayers. He did not care whether the child lived or died, he did not want it. Nobody would ever know he was the father anyway, so what was the point? He resumed his wish to die soon, hoping he would be dead by the time the child came out of its poor mother's womb so that he would never get to see the aftermath of his impropriety. Warigia's world had suddenly changed. If her life had been difficult before, it was a nightmare now. To carry a child in the womb can be challenging for any woman, but for a crippled unwed girl to carry her stepfather's child, it was traumatic. Every day was a battle for her. She had to deal with the changes taking place in her body in the hostile environment of her stepmother and stepsisters who despised her for getting pregnant out of wedlock, while at the same time harboring within them jealousy, since they did not have children of their own. The rest of the village was not forgiving either. She was sneered at everywhere she went. Even the few friends she had soon abandoned her so that she had no one to confide in. Her stepfather and secret father of her unborn child, Wanjui, continued digging his own grave by his relentless drinking. The Kikuyu had no currency and barter trade was the only way to buy what one needed. Wanjui usually acquired his brew by exchanging with small portions of farm produce. The women in his household became worried because he was now rapidly depleting the food stored in the granary just to sponsor his daily habit. Whenever they would try to prevent him from taking foodstuffs from the granary, Wanjui would lash out at the women, reminding them individually of their own faults, and that he was still in charge of the household, and he was going to do whatever he pleased. "Shame on you, stupid woman," he would often tell his wife. "Why are you complaining about food and yet your caste womb never produced any children to feed?" He would then turn to his daughters, Wanjira and Nyakyanda. "As for you two, I don't know whether you were rejected for either being too lazy or too fat, but that doesn't give you the right to eat my food. Go and look for husbands who can afford to feed your large bellies. I am old and weak and I should not be feeding anybody. Big babies." He would then go ahead and take whatever he wanted from the granary, to the frustration of the women. His harsh words to them may have been in some sense true, but he had forgotten the fact that there was food in the granary in the first place was their doing. They did all the work, the planting, the harvesting and other related duties, as he sat idly by, barking orders and drinking, which was the prerogative of Kikuyu men of a certain age. Warigia would remain silent throughout such confrontations, but it was also painful for her to watch her stepfather carry away foodstuffs just to quench his voracious thirst for alcohol. She came to the realization that at this rate, there would be nothing left in the granary and in the garden by the time her child was born. Furthermore, it was a child nobody wanted. The unwanted child. Then one rainy night, Warigia went into labor. She was alone in her hut. Her stepsisters had, in the wake of her pregnancy, moved to another hut to show their resentment. She was now about to give birth and no one was by her side. She got up on her feet, hoping her stepmother would let her inside her hut and help her with the imminent birth, but being a cripple who was now in labor, she was too overwhelmed to walk. When she tried to scream for help, the heavy rain deafened her cries. The labor had all been in vain. The child would surely die without a midwife to attend to it, and her life was probably in danger too. The Kikuyu god is punishing me for conceiving a child with my stepfather, she thought. In a strange twist of fate, the heavy rain caused most of the huts within the homestead to flood. Warigia's hut was, however, not affected. Her stepmother and stepsisters dashed in the rain to seek refuge in her hut, only to find her wiggled in the agony of labor. Her stepmother Wanjegu did not care very much whether Warigia lived or died, but the prospect of a newborn child naturally appealed to her maternal instincts, and she, a barren woman all her life, was not about to let a poor baby die on her watch. She did all she could to salvage the situation. Just before dawn, the baby was born. The weary mother was much pleased to see it was, after all, a boy. However, the baby looked very weak and sickly. Hours after it was born, the baby's hold on life seemed to dwindle. It neither cried nor opened its eyes. It was not expected to live through the day, and the stepmother directed the stepsisters to start digging a hole for it to be buried. Wanjui, upon hearing the child would die soon, secretly rejoiced, knowing his shameful contribution to its creation. Kikuyu customs dictated that even a dying newborn deserved a name. The son of an unwed mother took the name of the mother's father or even stepfather. Wanjui declined his name to be used so as to distance himself from the whole unpleasant spectacle. Warigia's real father from her lost clan was called Githina, which in Kikuyu referred to a man of constant sorrows. Regardless, the poor child received the name even as life continued to drain from its little frail body. The muddy little grave was now ready for its occupant. As the sun set that evening, the baby was still breathing, and so the burial was postponed to the next day. Warigia, even in her short clumsy hands, clenched her poor little son to her bosom all night, smiling and whispering to him. She knew this was the only baby she was ever going to have, and so she was going to stay up with him all night until he took his last breath, if only so she could tell people one day that she once had a son and his name was Githina, and what a wonderful child he was. However, as she held the baby, as little as he was, she repeatedly begged Mwinyaga, god of the mountain, to save him. Then she spoke to the baby, trying to reason with him directly. "My poor little child, my poor little son." Warija cried. "Don't you know that your mother is proud of you? You are such a blessing to me. God has sent you in my life to bring me love and wipe my tears. You are all I have. I was alone for a long time before you came. Now that you are here, I am not alone anymore, so why do you want to go and leave your mother alone again?" She touched the baby's lips with one finger. "How can you leave and yet you have just arrived? Even a guest usually takes something to eat and drink before he returns from wherever he came from. So why won't you even take a little milk from my breast? What will happen to the milk if you do not take it? It is not good to waste food, so please wake up and feed. If you go, your mother will be laughed at again and this time she will surely die of humiliation, but if you stay, your mother will cook for you and you will be such a strong boy that no one will ever laugh at your mother again. You will one day be a great man and everyone is going to respect me because of you, so don't go just yet, you have a loving mother and bright future waiting for you." The next morning, the baby boy opened his eyes and looked up at his mother's sleepy ones, cried and then stopped when his mother introduced to him her breast. By the middle of the day, the baby had bounced back to life to the astonishment of the stepmother and the stepsisters. Other women in the village poured in to see the miracle child whose birth had coincided with the end of a very dry season. At the end of the week, Warija was reassured the worst was over and the child would survive after all. The little grave remained unoccupied. The gravediggers did not refill it, perhaps holding on to the sheer hope the baby would still die and the effort would not have been in vain. When 4 weeks passed and the baby was clearly out of harm's way, they planted a fig tree inside the grave instead. The food crisis. Wanjui's drinking habit had nearly left the household without any food. He carried on as if he had a secret mission from his Kikuyu ancestors and demons to drink himself to death as well as starve the household to the same direction. Not even the arrival of the baby swerved him from his goal or roused even a pinch of sympathy within him. Apart from the choruses in his head every night from his Kikuyu ancestors and demons, he now had to make room for one more, a crying baby. The child had survived much to Wanjui's disappointment. The Kikuyu god had a funny sense of humor it seemed, which he thought was geared to further humiliate him. How can the child survive just when he had inherited the name of a forgotten relative? In Kikuyu customs, it was wrong to change the name of a baby whatever the case and not even Wanjui dared cross that line. Now the villagers were wondering why the baby wasn't named after him, the present and living grandfather. It is just as well, Wanjui thought. If they knew that I am indeed the father and not the grandfather, they would burst. The food supply was seriously running low and now the women of the household convened in one of the huts to see how the impending crisis could be averted. Warija's stepmother, Wanjegu, had grown old and no longer had the strength to work the fields. Wanjui's 2 daughters, Wanjira and Nyakyanda, were physically capable, yet their prolonged stay in their father's house when they should have been married and managing their own homes, left them restless and unmotivated. Every so often, they clung to the fading hope that a suitor might still emerge and sweep them into marriage, but until then, they remained half-hearted showmaids. Their reluctance to fully commit to household duties often put them at odds with their stepmother, who grew increasingly frustrated with their laziness. Warija always tried her best as far as her physical abilities allowed. In seasons where food was plenty and more labor was required, Wanjui would hire laborers to help in the harvest and other related activities. Warija had somewhat enjoyed the benefits of being crippled as she was growing up. She may not have felt loved, but she did feel sheltered from back-breaking activities. Now times had changed. She had proven she was a fit woman by having a child, and a devious one for that matter, for refusing to disclose the child's father. With a new mouth to feed in the light of a domestic food crisis, no one was extending Warija any favors. Her baby son had escaped the jaws of infant death only to be cast into a world where starvation was becoming a slow reality. It was quite an uphill task of survival for one baby to endure. Remedial kindness. The meeting took place in the stepmother's hut while Wanju was in the village drinking. With her baby in her hands, Warigia took her place in the corner as the baby breastfed. It was the first time she was being taken seriously by her stepmother and stepsisters. "We are here because your father has decided to destroy his life and ours," Wanjegu began. "If we don't stop him soon, there will be no food in this household at all. It's not like we have not tried to stop him before, he just won't listen. That's why this time we have to do something more drastic. The next harvest is too far away to gamble with whatever is left in the granary." "But what can we do?" asked Nyakyanda. "We must go and see the Council of Elders and state our case," replied Wanjegu. "A man cannot just be allowed to destroy his family just because he is tired of living. What do you think he will do to us once he finds out we went behind his back to report him to the elders?" asked Wanjera. "It doesn't matter what he will do to us," Wanjegu replied. "Whatever it is, it can't be worse than starving to death." "I agree with Mother," Wanjira pointed out, "but who among us will go and face the council? Why don't we go to our uncle first?" "You mean Kiramba?" exclaimed Wanjira. "Are you out of your mind? He and your father are enemies. He will be happy to hear how the household is suffering." "But isn't he a member of the council?" Nyakyanda questioned. "Yes, he is," said Wanjegu. "He may hate your father, but that does not mean every member of the council does too. If they listen to our plea, there will be justice." As the women plotted how to approach the council with their grievances, Warigia cuddled her baby to sleep and then introduced her soft lowly voice to the conversation. "You don't know him like I do," she interjected, ready to share her thoughts about her stepfather. "My heart is close to his and I hear him talking to himself every night, telling his God to take him away. He wants to die." They were shocked at the revelation. She indeed had more insight to Wanjui than anyone. She knew the despair he had to live with after the death of his son Karua, the frustrations with his daughters and the problems with his brother Kiramba. She proposed another solution to the matter that stunned the three women. "So, you see, he is only doing the things he is doing because he has lost a reason to live." Warigia took over the meeting. "It is also clear to me that he is a man who no longer fears Mwinyaga. If we report him to the Council of Elders, what do you think they will do? They will take the beer from him and he will be more frustrated than ever, and surely he will poison himself with a quicker poison than the brew, since he is only trying to drink himself to death anyway." The women looked at each other. "The elders won't help us," Warigia continued. "Our uncle Kiramba is a senior member of the council, and he will sway their decision in his favor. He will only be too happy to see father die, since it will mean him taking over our household, which is his right as the eldest clansman within the Karua clan. Once he does, he'll have no use for us. He'll force us into arranged shameful marriages just to get rid of us. With only mother left, he will claim she's an old widow who can't manage the property on her own, and Kiramba will seize everything. She'll be left at his mercy, and we both know what that means. She won't survive, meaning she might starve to death after all." Again, the women were shocked by Warigia's insight. "I think you are right," remarked Nyakyanda, "but what do you propose we do? You have to understand that if father dies, we are going to be the losers, therefore we must do everything in our power to ensure that does not happen." Warigia said. "First, we need to show him that despite all he is doing to make our life impossible, that we still care for him." Warigia explained. "He needs to see us cooking him better food than we have been doing and spicing up his room. Get him new beddings, a new walking stick, and make sure his clothes are always clean. Believe me when I tell you that we need to learn how to make Miratina beer for him. Instead of him taking food to go exchange with local beer out there, let us cook it for him here at home in order to save the food. The ingredients we shall use are not worth as much as the food he drains from our granary week after week. A wave of optimism filled the room as the women listened to Warija in utter silence. Lastly, let's make efforts to engage him in dialogue from time to time. She continued. He really is a lonely man, that's why he talks to his ancestors in the dark, because he has almost no one else to talk to. If we do these things, I have no doubt our father shall live perhaps long enough until my baby grows and becomes old enough to be considered a legitimate heir by the elders and the clansmen. As long as there is a grown-up male in the household, not Kiramba or any other clansman can touch us. That is the law of our Kikuyu land. The women were shocked at Warija's suggestion, but in the end, they realized it was the only way out of the crisis. In the months that followed, Warija led a campaign in the household to reclaim back the man they loved to hate, her stepfather Wanjui. Not only was their food at stake, but their entire future too. The women struggled to get the beer ingredients, but their determination to save the household overcame any obstacles on the way. Luckily, Wanjegu just happened to be a skilled Miratina brewer. At first Wanjui was baffled that the women had suddenly started treating him like a god. He did not mind the women cooking him better food and showering him with every domestic luxury a Kikuyu homestead owner was entitled to, but when they started brewing Miratina beer for him, he was alarmed. Inquisitively, he suspected they wanted to poison him. At first, he would not drink the brew, then it registered with him that dying was what he had wished for in the first place. It was one thing for him to wish for death, but entirely another to sip it willingly as a favorite beverage. When he questioned the women about their sudden generosity, they explained that the beer he drank in the village was of poor quality, and they could no longer bear to see him suffer frequent bouts of diarrhea after overindulging. When he finally mustered the courage to taste the beer they had brewed, he couldn't hide his satisfaction. From that moment on, he no longer drank recklessly in the village. The women used the beer to warm up to his gloomy personality. He had always been a hard man to talk to, and the women could hardly ever think of a topic that interested him. Now they could always awaken his spirits by using the beer to base the conversation on, and sometimes something meaningful could come out of it. Occasionally laughter would descend upon the household and everyone would go to bed happy. Warija's plan had worked. The household had subdued Wanjui, and slowly he switched his focus from death to the prosperity of his household once again. After a while, his drinking became manageable and it did not interfere with the food in the granary. The fortunes seemed to turn for the family when villagers heard about the quality of Miratina brewed in Wanjui's household by the women, and now they wanted a taste. In Kikuyu tradition, women were encouraged to brew beer for their husbands as a reciprocal gesture that the husband was a good provider. Wanjui's first wife, Wanjegu, may have been barren, but she made up for it with unwavering dedication, honing her hidden talent for brewing Miratina, a skill passed down from her grandmother decades ago. Her beer quickly gained fame, drawing villagers eager to trade anything they could for a taste. Before long, the granary overflowed with foodstuffs, necessitating the construction of another. As word spread, the family's wealth grew, not just in food reserves but also in livestock, as the Kikuyu often used emaciated animals in barter trade during dry seasons. Since Wanjui could now afford to hire laborers to herd his livestock anywhere pastures were available, no matter the season, the animals increased rapidly over time. Wanjui was now in good terms with his wife and daughters, and he did not converse with his Kikuyu ancestors and demons anymore. The family that had once been riddled with misfortunes seemed to blossom again, more so when Warija's son Githina hatched his way into boyhood, filling everyone with hope that he could one day be the head of the household. As the boy grew, Wanjui's relationship with him was like that of a grandfather and grandson, yet deep down, he knew the truth: he was the boy's father. He often thought the Kikuyu god really had a sense of humor, allowing his bloodline to continue without granting him the recognition of true fatherhood, as he was merely the stepfather to the boy's mother. Still, the weight of the lineage still pressed upon him. He secretly vowed that on his deathbed, he would reveal the truth, hoping the boy would honor his name. In the face of mortality, the survival of a legitimate family name was just as important as the bloodline. Meanwhile, Wanjui relished the newfound respect he commanded in the village, all thanks to the renowned Muritina beer brewed in his household. Among the Kikuyu, Muritina was more than just a drink, it was a cultural fixation, and those who mastered its brewing became highly esteemed figures. The finest brewers were even rumored to have received their secret ingredient from the Kikuyu god himself, the only explanation for their rare craftsmanship. During festive times, beer brewers held more sway than the Council of Elders, for a great brew could unite a community in celebration, unlike anything else. The White Rumors. Mukuyu village at the turn of the century was yet to see what a white man looked like. The most believable information came in form of rumors circulated by overzealous messengers dashing back and forth a few times a year from one village to another. The Kikuyu people had a name for the whites, Njuka, which meant newcomers. The most enduring speculation was that the whites were friendly people with a skin the color of milk, and they gave everyone who encountered them sweet things to eat, nice clothes, and something they called books. Then, using translators, the whites would narrate the story about a man who died on a tree, despite being the only son of the Creator. Then coming back to life, so that everybody's sins could be forgiven, and that whoever obeys this man will go to heaven and stay with him and his father forever in eternal bliss. That all this was written down in one of the books which they called a Bible. Everyone in Mukuyu village waited anxiously for the whites to come. The curiosity was now at its peak, and it was constantly inflated by many contradicting rumors. Some in the village who claimed to have encountered with the whites became, while others rejected the existence of them altogether. Wanjui, now a respected figure in the village, was often asked to lend his opinion over the matter. Rumors are always the roots of the tree of truth. They may be twisted and invisible to the eye, but something to their nature always comes forth from the surface. He once told a gathering, even though he was as clueless as everyone else. Personally, Wanjui felt threatened by the whites. Just when he had managed to pull in some wealth and command some respect, the foreigners now threatened to come and disrupt the quiet pace of village life he was enjoying. Who told them that the Kikuyu needed clothes and books? And a new god whose son died on a tree? What is wrong with Mwinyaga, god of the mountain? Wanjui often thought. Brothers in arms. Kiramba, Wanjui's older brother and lifelong rival, had long been unsettled by Wanjui's newfound success. Though bitterness simmered within him, he had held back from taking action, for to be the man who halted the brewing of Muritina in Wanjui's home would be to make an enemy of the entire village. The Kikuyu people cherished their beer, and anyone who interfered with their leisure was quickly despised. However, as the years passed and Kiramba continued watching the villagers gravitating towards Wanjui's homestead, jealousy overwhelmed him. The thought of Wanjui's fortunes reviving to the extent of him acquiring wealth and status was unbearable to Kiramba. Unable to hold his patience any longer, he decided he would act, and this time, he would destroy Wanjui for good. Wanjui's growing wealth and popularity threatened to obscure Kiramba's legacy as the towering figure in the community. Kiramba, also fearing Wanjui might use his power to revisit and avenge old family feuds, quickly came up with a plan to destroy him once and for all. Drinking brew is going to be prohibited in the daytime and can only carry on to a certain point at night as well, the Council of Elders sent out the word. The villagers were shocked and demanded to know why. The morals of the village have gone down drastically and the beer is to blame. The council made it known. We have arrived at this difficult decision not to interfere with your personal lives, but to save the village from total collapse. Please obey this rule or face the consequences. It was quite a harsh decision for the council to make. At the center of it was Kiramba, the most senior elder and chairman of the council. He was no doubt a very influential man. When he brought the motion up for discussion, he pretended he was concerned with the drinking habits of the village men, but secretly it was a ploy to stall Wanjui's thriving beer business. The other members of the council did not think that the villagers had lowered their morals, but it didn't matter what they thought. Kiramba had garnered majority support through secret bribes. The Kikuyu warriors were strong, capable men of varying ages, with each warrior being at the peak of his prime. They had sworn an oath to serve the council, and their role was to uphold the laws with unwavering dedication. Whoever was caught drinking at the wrong hour was apprehended and taken to face the council, just to be slapped with a stiff penalty. However, Wanjui's business did not suffer. The villagers continued to drink with a raised passion, buying as much as they could at night and stashing it to drink whenever they wanted. When Kiramba saw the whole thing had failed, he again summoned the council and they invented yet another new law. Not everyone in the village shall be allowed to brew Muritina beer. We shall vet anyone who intends to carry on with this activity. The council sent forth word. Again, the villagers were shocked and demanded to know why. We have observed that some of those brewing the beer are not doing so with the traditional standards as set by our forefathers, resulting into a lot of people becoming sick or dying. The council alleged. Despite the usual hangovers that came with excessive drinking, no one had ever fallen gravely ill to the point of death. Yet, Kiramba had skillfully manipulated the villagers' perceptions, stirring up widespread panic. Wanjui knew he was the real target of this unrest. Brewing Muritina was a delicate art, requiring precise rations of the ingredients and careful timing. Not everyone had the skill to craft quality beer. It often took a certain knack to get it right. Wanjui's wife, Wanjegu, was a master brewer, but when she appeared before the council to explain her techniques, she was suspended. The council confiscated all her brewing apparatus and assigned the Kikuyu warriors to inspect the homestead any time of day to ensure no brewing activity was going on. Along with the Council of Elders, Kiramba had spearheaded the destruction of Wanjui's thriving business to serve his own interests, conspiring to maliciously destroy Wanjui's means of income. No longer able to hide his frustrations with Kiramba, Wanjui rallied the village to revolt against the council on grounds of bribery and unfair passing of laws. The village rebellion. The council happened to be already losing favor with many in the village due to its harsh policies. For instance, it had banned married women from participating in village dances and was now imposing levies on circumcision ceremonies, forcing families to part with some livestock just for their sons to undergo the rite of passage. It also demanded steep fines for even the smallest offenses. Now, with the introduction of stricter laws against drinking, the villagers turned to Wanjui, rallying behind him to push for council reforms. The villagers held a meeting and invited Wanjui to speak, expecting him to chart the way forward. The meeting venue was in the fields, to keep the council aloof, but somehow, word reached them. Aware they were now very unpopular and a revolution was imminent, the council summoned the Kikuyu warriors to disrupt the meeting and arrest the ringleaders. As the meeting progressed, the warriors were marching their way to the venue. The meeting was attended by nearly 100 men in the village and a dozen women. An old man by the name of Wanyeki spoke first, addressing the unjust laws the council had passed. Then he invited Wanjui to speak. The applause came immediately. He was no doubt the most popular person in the village, having overcome tragedy and near poverty to rise to a position of prominence. The Kikuyu loved a good success story, believing Mwinyaga to have played a hand in the matter. So, with his fly whisk in hand, Wanjui Karua stood to give the most anticipated speech of his life. My friends, we are gathered here today because the freedom that was left to us by our forefathers is at stake. He cleared his throat as the crowd murmured in agreement. Some men think they can overturn the laws of our land to suit their own pleasures. We cannot live under the leadership of such men who are now unfortunately using our young men, the Kikuyu warriors, to push forward their interests. The crowd cheered as he composed himself before proceeding. You all know what these self-proclaimed wise men of the village have been doing, from undermining some of our traditional ceremonies to collecting heavy fines and filling their stomachs. Are we to sit and watch our lives being ruined by these so-called clan representatives? These elders have not only abused the positions they occupy but have also blasphemed the name of our great god of the mountain, Mwinyaga. The crowd roared in support. He then raised his hands urging everyone to calm down, cleared his throat amid the silence and proceeded without any hesitation or hitch in his voice. My friends, we shall find it difficult as a community to carry on peacefully with our lives without the freedom our forefathers passed down to us. Therefore, it is now our sacred duty to forcefully remove the current council. Every last member must go. The crowd fired up with chants of approval. Wanju was the first person in the history of the village to suggest a coup against a sitting Kikuyu council of elders, which was considered divinely appointed by Mwinyaga, a god of the mountain. Even as I say this, he continued, I realize that the warriors who are charged with the protection of our community, and who have taken an oath to serve the council, are going to stand by the council, and it's going to be almost impossible to accomplish our mission. And so you ask, what shall we do? The crowd murmured again but quickly sank into deafening silence, awaiting their leader to provide a solution. Since the warriors are the only thing standing between us and the council, we must therefore neutralize these young men, but not by organizing an army of our own and shedding blood, no. The warriors will tear us into pieces since they are more experienced in combat. However, by calling the warriors to a meeting and engaging them in dialogue, we can show them all the wrongs the council is guilty of, and surely if the warriors are wise and upright, they will be on our side. The crowd seemed torn. Some were disappointed by the suggestion while others were in support. If Wanju was brave enough to suggest that the council of elders should be replaced, then he was certainly brave enough to order the crowd to be silent as he now took command as their acting leader. I know what some of you are thinking, that the warriors might not share in our sentiments and our revolution will be crushed altogether. He explained as sweat drops rolled down his bearded face. May Mwinyaga forbid that we fail, because some of us will be in trouble and we shall be heavily fined or banished from this community. That's why, my dear brothers and sisters, we cannot afford to fail. Should the warriors reject our proposal, I have another proposal in mind. We shall bribe them. The crowd became hysterical now, but again he lifted his hands up to calm it, this time not waiting for it to be completely silent but speaking louder to mute the murmurs. If the council of elders can be corrupt to serve their own interests, we can too, for our own sake. He remarked with his voice raised. They do it to benefit themselves, but we shall do it for the benefit of our community. Mwinyaga will understand. The murmurs turned to cheers, then to applause, and then jubilation for Wanjui. The villagers admired the courage Wanjui had projected against the tyranny of the council. Mukuyu village had no central leader, but as dissatisfaction towards the council grew, Wanjui emerged as a strong contender for the role. For his leadership to be legitimized, a new council had to be formed, with each of the 13 clans selecting a representative. Once established, the newly appointed elders would then have to assess Wanjui's character, judging whether he possessed wisdom and moral integrity, before electing him as a political headman and the overall leader of Mukuyu village. There was no doubt that Wanjui would be elected the leader by a new council, since no one else in the entire village had stood up as strongly in condemnation of the corrupt council as he had, a council that carried itself with self-entitlement, claiming it had been chosen by Mwinyaga himself, god of the mountain. Wanjui, on the other hand, believed that the god of the mountain only helped those who helped themselves and was not overly concerned with the trivial affairs of men. In his view, it was the ancestors who held greater sway over earthly matters, their influence shaping the fortunes and misfortunes of the living. The meeting resolved that Wanjui and a group of 6 men would approach the warriors and attempt to secure their loyalty through persuasion. If this approach failed, they would resort to the second plan, bribery. Though it was a risky move, Wanjui agreed to take the lead in negotiating with the warriors by asking them what they desired in exchange for their loyalty, after which the villagers would pull together to meet their bribe demands. Unfortunately, the Kikuyu warriors had already been sent the very same hour to break up the meeting and take into custody the main agitators. When villagers saw the gallant warriors approaching, they started dispersing away, leaving just the old men who could not run. The Kikuyu warriors were a formidable army of young to middle-aged men who had taken an oath to serve the council and win Nyaga. In any community where the Kikuyu lived, a group of men numbering from 20 to 100 or more, depending on the population, were chosen and trained in the warfare of crude weapons. Beyond policing their own village, the warriors occasionally united with their counterparts from other villages to defend the larger Kikuyu society from attacks by neighboring tribes. The Kikuyu warriors from Mukuyu village, who were a group of about 40 armed fierce men, now stormed the meeting and started hunting for specific persons within the panic-stricken crowd. Everybody was scattering away except for Wanjui and his peers, who were just a handful of old men no match for the warriors. The Kikuyu warriors had a decree from the council for the arrest of Wanjui and his men. The warriors briskly accompanied them back to the village, locking them inside a hut for a whole night without food and water. The next morning, Wanjui and his alleged accomplices, 7 other old men, appeared before the council of elders to answer for their crimes. Unfair justice. In every Kikuyu community, there was a designated hut that served as the official meeting place for the council of elders. Here, they conducted all matters of governance on behalf of the village. Being a council member was considered a position of privilege, as it allowed one to spend the day deliberating on the village's affairs, both significant and trivial, while reaping the rewards of authority. Over time, these elders amassed considerable wealth, receiving payments in the form of goats, cows, and other valuable property, collected as fines from villagers who violated Kikuyu customary laws. The council members now sat outside the hut, on stools, clenching their crooked canes tightly in their hands and between their legs. They watched in sheer pride as the Kikuyu warriors forced Wanjui and his accomplices to sit on the bare ground. In Kikuyu customs, a man forced to sit on the ground while others remained elevated on stools was a sign of deep disgrace, a visual reminder of his diminished status and the authority of others over him. Many villagers became interested in the judicial proceedings, some of whom were genuinely concerned about Wanjui's fate, while some were only there for the spectacle, as nothing of the sort had ever occurred in the village before. When the trial was about to begin, about 150 people formed half a circle at the spacious compound as Wanjui and his men sat at the center facing the council. They now watched in sheer curiosity as a man who was nicknamed Kimeni, secretary to the council, announced the charges. All 8 of you are herein accused of betrayal to the great Kikuyu way of life as set by our forefathers. Kimeni spoke loudly facing Wanjui and his men. You have gone against the sacred guidelines of the council, the elders, and furthermore, you arranged, participated and influenced a meeting whereby you advocated for the removal of the council by bribing our great warriors. These are serious charges against you. The council of elders is divinely appointed by Munyaga, god of the mountain, and it is therefore wrong to exact oneself over the council, for not only is it an act of treason but an act of abomination. Wanjui scanned the crowd in disappointment, realizing that the very people he had addressed just a day earlier were now gathered to witness his punishment. The villagers, subdued by the illusion that the council possessed divine authority, returned under its hypnotic control without question. It was now clear that traitors had been present at the meeting the day before, since there was no other way the council could have learned about the plan to bribe the warriors. Dear members of our community, Kimeni continued, those of you who had sympathized with these men, the council hereby forgives you, but the council will not tolerate any of you participating in future revolts. Right now or before the council makes its decision, every man here is required to pledge his loyalty to the council by taking an oath of devotion. Every man ready to take the oath, please kneel down where you are. All women, please step back. The village was caught by surprise. In Kikuyu customs, an oath was a very serious matter. Women did not take oaths, but when a man took an oath, he was bound to it until his death. Oaths were not that common in Kikuyu customs, and mostly they pertained to elders, warriors, and medicine men, but hardly the general public. Wanju watched in humiliation. The people he had tried to liberate were now enslaved by the council even further. The administering of the oath now meant that the villagers could never rise against the council again. The council warned that any man that did not take an oath in the village was on the same side as Wanju and his colleagues and therefore would receive the same stiff penalty that awaited them. For the men who were not present, the Kikuyu warriors and other loyalists went around the village gathering as many of them as they could find, dragging them by their dozens to the ceremony to take the oath. The oath itself was a silly improvised act which required one to repeat words of allegiance to the council and then dip a finger on a calabash of goat's blood, lick a bit of it and then wipe the finger with soil. Allegedly, this was to signify that spirits in the ground would kill whoever breaks the oath. After the men had taken the oath, Kimeni introduced one of the council elders to deliver the ruling. The tall and thin elder, who went by the name of Mushiri, stood up and cleared his throat. These are the orders of the council. Mushiri shouted in a hoarse commanding voice. Each one of you is required to produce 30 of your fattest goats and 10 of your fattest cows. Furthermore, you will each give 5 sacks of millet, 5 sacks of sweet potatoes and 5 sacks of beans. Lastly, you will be required to stay in your own homes without going anywhere until such a time the council decides to pardon you. If you fail to produce what you have been asked or refuse to remain in your homes, you will be banished from this community for good. The village was shocked but was helpless now. The penalty was the stiffest ever given. Some of the men convicted did not have enough to feed their own families, let alone surrender anything to the council. The council mostly shared the loot found from any villager who had broken the law, and it would be no different this time. It was their own way of rewarding themselves for what they claimed was a lifetime of public service by divine appointment. Kiramba, Wanjui's brother and lifetime nemesis, sat among the council members, with a smug grin on his face. His eyes spoke the words he didn't need to say. He had won their lifelong duel. There was no way Wanjui's household could continue to prosper now. Despite owning over 100 goats and 30 cows, the heavy fine would be a considerable setback, and with no Muritina beer left to sell, his downfall was inevitable. Kiramba seemed to have gotten his wish finally. Warija was not present when Wanjui faced the council. When word reached her about the stiff penalty Wanjui received, she prepared for the worst. The Kikuyu warriors were required to fetch the livestock and the foodstuffs immediately from Wanjui and his men. Warija and her stepsisters hastily tried to hide some of the foodstuffs so that the Kikuyu warriors would not carry them. As she was rummaging the food from the granary, Warija came across 2 large gourds of Muritina, the last batch of the beer her stepmother had brewed before the ban. She knew that, upon the Kikuyu warriors finding the beer, they would carry it along, since the council had banned her stepmother from brewing, and it would be property of the council too. Suddenly, the dangerous idea entered her mind. Moving the hand of God. Warija knew that it was again the beginning of the end for her family. The council had destroyed their legitimate family business and was now coming to take away a huge chunk of the wealth the family had worked so hard to accumulate. Again, her future and that of her young son Githina was at stake. With her stepfather humiliated, robbed and put under house arrest by the council, she was afraid he might die for sure this time. This would leave the household vulnerable again, leaving little to the imagination of what Kiramba and the council would do next. There was only one way to try to avoid the impending doom upon the household: destroy the council before it erased the household, the family name and the lineage of Wanji Karua. The Kikuyu warriors, who were very loyal to the council, would soon arrive to seize the livestock and the food. Warigia knew they would also take the Miritina beer, which would end up in the council's hut. The council comprised of men who sat drinking all day, and thus would never let some well-brewed Miritina go to waste. Warigia decided to poison the beer. Warigia had spent her lonely childhood among flowers and wild plants, finding solace in the quiet company of nature. Over the years, she had learned that some weeds in the forest were poisonous. Though she was a cripple, she had picked up some rare wisdom from Mother Nature, or an acute sense of smell that allowed her to distinguish the deadly plants from the harmless ones. She had once tested this knowledge, feeding a hungry goat a handful of toxic leaves. Within hours, the animal lay dead. She quickly went to the fields and fetched all the various types of poisonous weeds she could find, crushed them in a calabash and poured the solution into each of the gourds containing the beer, shook well and left them there for the Kikuyu warriors to find. It was a gamble, but her maternal instincts told her that it was the only way her son would survive the onslaught of Kiramba and the Council of Elders. They came at dusk, ransacking the whole place and taking what the council had ordered. Kimeni, secretary to the council, had accompanied them to ensure everything was accounted for. Another regiment of the warriors had accompanied Wanju to the fields to select the cows and goats he had been ordered to part with. In the field, Wanju's wife, Wanjegu, who had been watching over the herds in the company of a few hired herdsmen, now watched in tears as the warriors raided the healthiest animals in the lot. The group that came to the homestead consisted of 10 warriors, their presence casting a heavy shadow over the homestead. They moved with practiced ease, emptying the granaries as the women looked on in silent despair. Some of the villagers had come to watch the unfolding drama, disguising their curiosity with sympathy. Warigia knew that a great injustice was being committed, but when she saw the warriors take away the brew, she knew the true hand of justice was about to visit the village once and for all. The Kikuyu warriors, in keeping with their oath towards the council, brought all the finds extracted from Wanjui and his men, the total of which was a mighty heap of plunder. A widespread parade of livestock meandered noisily outside the council's hut, filling the large compound, while the sacks of foodstuffs were kept inside another hut in the compound, which was a store for the council's personal belongings. Traditionally, the finds were distributed fairly among the clans. However, the council had long done away with such traditions, simply by using its alleged divine connections to dominate the people, thus allocating itself the plundered wealth as wages from Winyaga for its hard work. That night the council gathered again to conclude things. It was in reality a council of tyranny and indulgence. The elders now celebrated their ill-gotten wealth and their unstoppable reign over the village by having 2 goats slaughtered and roasted for them to feast. The elders usually had their own beer, but when they discovered the fresh Miritina beer seized from Wanjui's homestead, they incorporated it to their merrymaking, eating and drinking till late at night. Word had long spread that Wanjui's brew was unmatched, and despite having just ruined the man, the elders were eager to taste his craft. They all agreed it was fine brew, laughed about it and then drank every drop of it. The next morning, the village woke up to quite a horrifying scene. The elders lay dying in their assembly hut, foaming on their mouths and clenching their bellies in agony. Despite the medicine man's effort to save their lives, 12 out of the 13 elders were pronounced dead by sunset that day. Shock and wonder struck the village as to what had killed them. Theories started circulating fast that Mwinyaga had unleashed doom upon them for forcing the oath-taking and unjustly robbing Wanjui and his men of their property. Many villagers gathered around the corpses of the elders as they wondered what to do next. Kiramba was the only elder who had not died yet. He was a huge man and he had not yet been overpowered by the poison. As he lay prostrate in the medicine man's hut, the villagers came to a consensus that Mwinyaga, god of the mountain, had struck the elders dead for the terrible things they had done. Whether they ate meat from a sick animal or drank spoiled beer, no one cared. The Kikuyu believed it was bad luck to investigate an act that seemed connected to Mwinyaga, so no one, not even the Kikuyu warriors, questioned the manner in which the elders died. The villagers returned all the property to Wanjui and his 7 friends, and in a further twist of fate, they asked Wanjui and all 7 men to assume authority as the new council of elders, saying that the whole incident only proved that Mwinyaga favored them and wanted them to assume the vacant roles. The whole village hopped into song and dance celebrating the end of tyranny and the beginning of what promised to be a more transparent rule. Wanjui went from being a convicted lawbreaker to a celebrated lawmaker in the length of a night. Quickly, he became the most sought figure in the village, garnering adoration and commanding more respect than he could have ever imagined. They installed him as the first head council member of Mukuyu village, or simply, the headman. Traditionally, the Kikuyu did not have the formal title, chief. It was only after the arrival of the colonialists that the term, chief, would become an official designation for an influential Kikuyu leader. Yet, in every sense, Wanjui's new position was that of a chief in the making, an authority figure who would guide the villagers through their first encounter with the white men. The next day, the men quickly slaughtered 10 bulls and 30 goats pulled together from the villagers, as the women made porridge and food. Muratina beer was also in plenty amidst the singing and dancing, everyone in praise of the outcome. The celebration superseded any others held in the history of the village. Warija did not bother to venture out of the homestead and mix with the revelers. Instead, she stayed home with her son celebrating in her own way. Although she had done it secretly this time, she had still managed to save her family from doom, and an entire village for that matter. She had, without an iota of guilt, accomplished the perfect murders by eliminating a corrupt council of elders. Yet she yearned for no recognition, no reward, beyond the freedom and means to raise her son. She had long refused to be defined by her crippled body, and now, through her son, she saw the possibility of a future filled with dignity and purpose. One day, she would be a respected woman, a grandmother, a great-grandmother, and so on, to a lineage of successful descendants. Just like a Kikuyu man, there was no greater wish for a Kikuyu woman than leaving behind an enduring bloodline, knowing that her name would live on even as she entered the next life when her time came. The celebrations went on until morning. Kiramba was still at the medicine man's hut lying unconscious in a bad state. It was expected that Kiramba would die during the night of the celebration, but by morning, he was still clinging to life. He was in such terrible condition that flies had started swarming the hut, clustering all over his eyes and mouth, a sure sign that death was imminently close according to Kikuyu beliefs. The headman and the intruders. That morning, Wanjui was scheduled to give his first speech to the villagers, of which they were eager to hear, before they went back to their homes. The turnout was so large that the meeting shifted from the council quarters to the open fields to accommodate everyone. Warija, her stepmother, and stepsisters also shared in the excitement and attended. It was here, in the same field less than 4 days ago, that the Kikuyu warriors had arrested Wanjui and his friends. Now the same Kikuyu warriors were standing attentively behind their new leader in loyalty. Someone fetched a stool for Wanjui to stand on as he cleared his throat. He got up and waved his fly whisk, a Kikuyu sign of leadership. The villagers cheered. "People of our great house of Kikuyu," Wanjui started. "I am very humbled for you to give me this opportunity to be your servant. We have gone through some very tough times, indeed very tough. We have all in one way or another suffered under the leadership of the previous council. I myself have personally suffered over the years, and it seemed for sure that the council would surely destroy me and my family, but my prayers reached the ears of Mwinyaga and finally he has answered me." The crowd cheered as Wanjui continued. Just when they were about to greedily divide among them the property they had stolen from me and my friends, Mwinyaga struck them down and now they are no more. The crowd was now past cheering, it roared. And now, he tried to calm the crowd, and now we have an opportunity to rebuild our lives and live in peace and harmony. My first duty as your leader is to revisit and overturn every unjust decision that was made by the previous council, and anybody who was unfairly treated or fined by those evil men will be remunerated. The crowd was past cheering and roaring, it went crazy. A carnival mood ensued, and everyone broke into song and dance. He had not even finished his speech, but now there was no need to. It was clear he could say or do nothing wrong. Wanjui Karua had once been a dying alcoholic, possessed by demons and the voices of his ancestors, with no wealth or a son to his name, but now he was the leader of the people, his enemies were dead, he was wealthy, adored, respected, and secretly, he had fathered a son. Githina might have called him grandfather, but the boy was really his son. Did it matter that nobody else knew the truth? Who cares, Wanjui thought. His bloodline would continue into the future all the same. In any case, the ancestors knew, and that was all that mattered. Now when his day finally came, he could rest peacefully with them. Warija quietly watched all this at a distance. Like the crowd, she could not hide her excitement, and knowing it was her actions that had made all this possible left her yearning just for a bit of attention. Still, how could anyone notice a crippled girl with a bastard son? The singing continued, mainly focused towards Wanjui. They lifted him up, carrying him back and forth the entire field, and if one group got tired of carrying him, they would handle him over to another group. Everyone wanted a go. The whole carnival suddenly came to a halt when a young boy came running across the field from the village and hastily relaying some kind of information to the first person in his collision, as he tried to catch his breath in a frantic shudder. "There are intruders in the village." Someone shouted the boy's message. The news devoured through the crowd so quickly that they had scarcely put Wanjui on the ground when it reached his ears. The Kikuyu warriors led the procession back to the area where the boy had spotted the intruders, charging bravely ready for a confrontation. The warriors split into 3 groups to cover as much ground as possible. They perused one homestead after another, door to door, expecting danger. Somebody screamed from a long distance away and the warriors regrouped back into their regiment heading towards the direction, with their spears firmly in their hands. The screams had emanated from a hut in the medicine man's homestead. Before the warriors could charge in, a man came out with his hands up. The villagers were astonished at his features. His skin was the color of milk and he wore astonishing clothes. He was a white man. Behind him came 3 others like him, 2 men and a woman. The Kikuyu warriors had expected a different sort of enemy, and despite their readiness to attack, they only danced their spears in the air, just as confused as the rest of the gathering villagers who now murmured endlessly. In the heat of the standstill, there emerged still from the hut a 4th person. To add even more confusion, the color of his skin was like the villagers, but he adored the same clothes as the whites. He raised his hands towards the warriors signaling for calm, and then he spoke. The villagers were relieved to hear he spoke their own language. "People of my house of Kikuyu," he said, "my name is Kimotho, and these are my friends. Before I tell you their names, let me tell you why we are here. You see, I am their translator. They can't speak our language, so they have to carry me with them everywhere they go, and today they came here. They just want to speak to you a bit. This one is called Alfred, the other one is Richard, the other is Thomas, and the woman is Margaret." The villagers sank into more murmurs and now laughter upon hearing how ridiculous the names sounded. "We would like to speak to your leader or leaders if you have any present," Kimotho added. Wanjui, who had been lost in the crowd, suddenly emerged as the warriors shoved people aside to clear his way as he walked to meet the strangers. He stood eye to eye with them. He had only been their leader for hardly a day, but now he was suddenly expected to jump right into the center of the village's new predicament. "What is it you want with the people of Mukuyu?" he asked Kimotho, the translator. Kimotho murmured something to Alfred, one of the white men, and Alfred spoke not back to Kimotho but directly to Wanjui, who in bewilderment now listened to a strange language being blabbered to him as if he was expected to understand. "This is what he is saying," Kimotho explained. "We have come in peace from a kingdom called Great Britain, and in that kingdom there is a king by the name of Edward VII. The king has sent us to come and give the people of your country medicine, education and clothes, but most importantly to also tell you about the Son of God who saves the souls of men all over the world, so that they can go to heaven when they die. We would like to be your guests for a while in your beautiful land if that's okay with you, and talk to you more." Wanjui was astonished at this but suddenly remembered he had heard it before. He knew they were the white saviors much rumored about. They were finally here, with impeccable timing just when he had become the leader of Mukuyu village. It was now his responsibility to deal with this new development. He wondered how he was going to do that. Alfred spoke more to Wanjui while at the same time, Kimotho translated. "We came to your village this morning and there was hardly anyone in sight. As we were looking whether there were people, from one homestead to the other, we heard the voice of a man crying inside this hut behind us. When we got in, we realized he was very ill and dying from some terrible sickness. Richard here is a doctor and he said the man had taken some form of poison. He gave him some medicine and now he seems to be doing much better." Wanjui's heart skipped a bit when he heard this. Kiramba was the man who had been in the medicine man's hut dying from punishment from Winyaga. How is it now that these white men from the middle of nowhere had suddenly given him medicine to recover? Aware that as the leader it was his place to host and engage the newcomers, Wanjui decided to take the discussion to the council's hut for privacy and asked the other elders to join him in debriefing the missionaries. As he led them to the council's hut, Wanjui lagged behind a bit and peeked at the medicine man's hut and saw Kiramba lying unconscious still, but now looking less pale with no flies around him anymore. Surely, the white doctor had saved him from death, for there was no reason Kiramba should still have been breathing at this hour. Wanjui shook his head and walked away deep in thought. When they all arrived at the council's hut half an hour later, Wanjui engaged the missionaries with both ease and hostility, inquiring of their real business in Mukuyu village apart from curing the sick. The missionaries probably expected him to be grateful that they had saved a dying man back in the medicine man's hut, but he showed no such sentiments. Kiramba was his enemy and now that the missionaries had saved his life, they were his enemies too. Where were they when my son Karua was dying? Why didn't they show up then? Wanjui thought as he fought his frustrations. The missionaries talked about setting up a center in Mukuyu from where they were going to attend the sick, teach the villagers how to read and write, as they preached to them the gospel of Jesus Christ. That without medicine, people will die from oncoming outbreaks that were killing other tribes. That without education, the people's minds will rot away. That without the gospel, the people will go to hell. Even though Wanjui had a council of elders, he was now in such an elevated position of influence that it was entirely up to him to make the decision. From what he had heard from neighboring villages all around, the missionaries had become such a sensation in other Kikuyu villages, bringing a fresh exciting element to village life and that whichever village they were welcomed the people there prospered. Wanjui felt the heavy weight of a decision that would forever alter life in Mukuyu village. He asked the whites to return in a few days, hoping for time to deliberate. Yet, as their ox-drawn wagon rolled away, he already knew his choice was inevitable. He had to allow them to proceed with their business in the village. Refusing them would only stir discontent among the villagers, who now eagerly extended their hands, smiling as they reached for a handshake with the foreigners. Wanjui had only postponed the decision because he still wanted to enjoy his new status a bit without outside interference. He was the headman now, but when the whites come back, they would steal all the attention and take all the glory with their magic medicine and other foreign attractions. Before the sun set over Mukuyu village that day, Wanjui returned to his homestead and quietly sat outside on his stool drinking Miritina beer and watching the sun go down. Warigia came washing his hands and placing a tray of food on his feet. She then sat on the ground beside him, keeping herself busy weaving a basket. There was silence between them, yet in the heart of that silence there was a deep understanding that did not need the exchanging of words. It did not matter whether she was his stepdaughter or mother of his secret son, or he knew she somehow sacrilegiously belonged to him. Theirs was a strange tale that only the ancestors and demons could fathom. Their son Githina played nearby. He was now a robust, lively boy about 7 years of age. They both watched him in utter silent satisfaction. The boy would never know all the secrets, the shame, the plotting and the battles fought for him to be conceived, to be born and to survive. To Wanjui and Warigia, the boy was their primary source of joy, their reason to live, the future of the lineage. He is all that mattered now. Yet, deep in his mind, Wanjui understood that times were changing. For Githina to grow into a man and carry on the family name, he would have to face the changing world ahead, one that would not be kind or easy. Wanjui knew he was an old man now, that he would not live long enough to witness his son's journey into manhood. Still, he was grateful to Mwinyaga for this mysterious blessing, the chance for his name and bloodline to be carried forth into the new world to come. He felt ready to rest with his ancestors, but not before passing down a few lessons to the boy. He could hardly wait for Githina to grow up just a few years more.